We're live from Los Angeles. I am Brooks Melchior, joined by our producer, Cam Smith. And all the crazy things going on in my life, suddenly we have calm. Boy, it is such a wonderful thing to have this show because it's the one time you can kind of escape from the emails, escape from the text messages, and the calls popping up on your phone and the knocks on all that stuff, right? This is beautiful. I wish you had this in your life. Oh, sorry, unavailable. No, I'm really unavailable. So coming up, we're going to be talking Super Bowl with Damon Bruce in San Francisco. He's actually in San Francisco, unlike the 49ers, who are in basically a suburb of San Jose, Santa Clara. We'll talk to Damon Bruce, 95-7 the game in San Francisco, about the 49ers. And then later on this hour, we'll talk to Seren Petro, a friend of mine, and a guy, if you're driving around Kansas City right now, if I was walking out to my car about to pass out because I just eaten at Gates Barbecue in Kansas City or Jack Stack, and I was getting into my car, you turn on the car, you flip it on, and there's 810 WHB, and you would hear Seren Petro. He's kind of the voice of Kansas City. And so it really is a privilege to have him on the show today to talk about the Chiefs being in the Super Bowl. I'm from Kansas City originally, grew up in Kansas City, came back, started a radio station actually in Kansas City, launched one for Intercom in the late 90s, early 2000s, covered the Chiefs myself. As an adult, it was kind of weird after having grown up there, moved away to go to college, came back 10 years later, started the station, now moved out again, been gone for about 15 years. But Seren was there when I was doing my thing with the radio station and got to know him really well, worked for the same company, and just the nicest guy in the world, but really, I'm really interested to hear what it's like right now in Kansas City, because I can imagine what it's like because, of course, I'm a Kansas Citian, but I haven't been there in so long. The one thing I'll tell you, though, what is it like in Kansas City? The funny thing about this situation with the Chiefs and the 49ers, right, is when you think about the Cubs or the Indians or the Lions or the Browns or all these teams, but especially like the Cubs as an example, or the Red Sox in the recent past. I mean, that's like the theme of their postseason run every single time they make it into the playoffs for as long as any of us can remember, for obvious reasons, right? But if you're in Kansas City, you're from Kansas City like me, and I grew up, I'm 52, so I grew up right when the Chiefs literally went into a death spiral. They won the Super Bowl in the 69-70 season. I was born in 67. Whoops. And so my entire childhood up until the age of 18, they were literally terrible. The minute I moved away, they got to be pretty good, but in some ways that was worse because they would get close and then you would have your heart ripped out. And finally, Clark Hunt, the son of Lamar Hunt, took over the team in an active manner, and now we have what we have. And of course, Pat Mahomes is the real reason. But the reason I'm bringing all of that up is that the people that are walking around Kansas City right now, they may as well have been Cubs fans when the Cubs were closing in on winning the World Series. It's the same principle. Nobody can remember in Kansas City. Those people are either, in hospice, or they're, your grandpa, fly fishing right now or whatever. Maybe they're not that old, but they're getting there. And so most people in mainstream Kansas City have no clue what it was like to have a Super Bowl. Now, what's interesting about all of that is, for me personally, because I was at that radio station that I started in Kansas City in the late 90s, early 2000s, when we launched that station, our big way to launch the station was to play back as kind of a stunt to launch the station the first thing that was going to go out over this frequency before we went onto the air as this new sports station, I thought of a stunt in which we played the audio broadcast of the Chiefs Super Bowl in which they beat the Vikings in 1970, right? And so you would think, okay, I'm at a big radio station. It shouldn't be that hard to find the broadcast of the Chiefs radio victory over the Vikings in the Super. Oh, it was hard. It was about as hard as anything I've ever done. And it took months to be able to find tape of that broadcast, which eventually I tracked down in Texas in the possession of a guy named Merle Harmon, who had been a long time sports broadcaster. And so eventually I found this tape and we put it all. I mean, it took like a year to edit the thing and make sense out of it and paste it all together. And eventually we got this onto the air as the beginning of the radio station. So I would hope that Intercom still has that tape. They probably don't. But it's a little bit like that same game, the television broadcast, which was supposedly lost to posterity, but has since been reconstructed and is on YouTube. If you want to look at the Chiefs' first Super Bowl appearance against the Vikings, you can find it on YouTube. For the longest time, it was one of those things where, I mean, the funny thing about that particular Super Bowl broadcast was more than one network broadcast the game. That's the way it used to be. So it was like CBS and NBC did the game at the same time. As stupid as that sounds, that's how it worked back then. This is Super Bowl 4, I believe. And so, and for whatever reason, they didn't keep the tape or they didn't tape the game. It's just unbelievable. And unfortunately, they couldn't find anybody who had taped it off their TV. I mean, it's incomprehensible. But thank God for the Canadians, because the Super Bowl broadcast that went out over in Canada was actually recorded and saved like a normal person would save it. I mean, the idea that it wasn't a big deal back then, and so we shouldn't pay attention. No. It was a big deal. They're just idiots at the networks. I don't know what they were doing. It's a little bit like sometimes you see the classic buildings, classic architecture, things that really matter being demolished, right? And we've kind of gone away from that, thankfully, in present day. But it's similar to what's happened to these old broadcasts. And so I had this, and understand, when I was doing this in Kansas City for this radio station, I mean, this is a big station, big company. So it was a really cool experience, because in the process of finding this old Chiefs radio broadcast of the Super Bowl, I met a lot of people with the Chiefs organization, broadcasting, people who had done it in the past, and guys like Len Dawson. And so it was a wonderful experience. And but it also underlined to me at the time, and this is back in 2000, how today, I mean, that was back then. No one really even knew that. I mean, literally, a lot of people didn't know we had been in the Super Bowl. So today you can imagine what it's like. But I can tell you this much. This is just from my own experience. What it means to people in Kansas City today. And to me, it's really neat to talk to somebody like Damon Bruce in San Francisco today, because that's such a different experience for many different reasons. Not that it's not as good as Kansas City, it's just different. But I can tell you that if you're walking around Kansas City today, right? If you go to 7-Eleven or you go to Walmart or you're in line for the ATM, there is a coin flip chance that the Super Bowl will be brought up between two people standing next to each other who are strangers. Let alone if you're in a watering hole or then it's a given. It's a given, because this is a city where you wear red on Friday to work. Let me repeat that. You wear red on Friday to work in Kansas City. It's like college or something. And of course, that only takes place when the team is good. And of course, the team's good these days. But so, and that's what it's like in a town like Kansas City. And even though it's a spread out place, at least it's this sort of centrally coherent location. Kansas City is. What's fascinating to me is, and this is something that I know people are going to be writing, if they're not doing it already, dissertations, PhDs, papers about this. This would be a fascinating paper if you're in college. The fact that we still call the 49ers, San Francisco, despite the fact that they are in Santa Clara, which is basically a suburb of San Jose, North San Jose, just north of Silicon Valley. It's, the proximity to San Francisco, it's not even close, but it's still San Francisco. It's fascinating how important it is to identify something like this NFL team with a city and why that happens. How it's just fascinating how, think of a town like Kansas City that has grown, or Indianapolis that has grown out with the white flight and all of that into the suburbs. They put the stadium right downtown, still kind of as a culturally identifiable anchor that kind of anchors everybody together still in this empty urban core. So those are kind of the things that I think about. We're gonna break the game down, particularly with Damon and Seren, and I have a lot of thoughts about the game. I like the Chiefs a lot in the Super Bowl. There's some really interesting questions, interesting storylines that we're going to talk about. God knows you got a lot of time. All right, so chill out. We're going to get to it. But we're going to, break the game down, particularly with somebody like Damon Bruce is going to join us right now from 95.7 The Game, because I've got some questions about the Niners as a Chiefs guy. And I can't think of a better matchup than what we have right now. So we're going to go out to San Francisco and talk to Damon Bruce at 95.7 The Game. Damon, I really appreciate it, man. Thanks so much for the time.
Oh, good to see you, man. I sorry I didn't set up the fancy backdrop where I got football helmets and all the books that I might have read behind me. You're just in my little kind of breakfast nook this morning, man. But good to see you. How about this Super Bowl, right? I mean, come on,
dude. I'm telling you, is this not a great matchup between the contrast of these teams and how this is unbelievable.
Look, it's exactly what we needed. It really is. It's the sexiest matchup available to you. By the way, I'm glad to see that you're grabbing coffee because that's exactly what I'm doing over here in the corner of my little thing. It's the most entertaining game to, I think, the hardcore fan and the casual fan all at the same time. It's definitely a network's dream, and it's the kind of game that even though I'm covering the 49ers and I'm going to be looking for a way for them to win all week, and you – born in Kansas City, I'm sure are thrilled the Chiefs in there. You're going to be looking for ways for the Chiefs to win all week. I'm going to come up with 15 different ways for this game to end between now and kickoff. And that means it's a well-matched, really interesting talking point Super Bowl, which is exactly what guys like you and I want.
Yeah. So tell me, how is this San Francisco team, this great vaunted defense, going to stop a guy like Pat Mahomes, who not only I think is the best player in the NFL, but the best player I can remember seeing since maybe Aaron Rodgers of 2010, 2011? I
mean, look, I don't think there's any stopping Patrick Mahomes. I think he fits the can't stop him, only hope to slow him down mold, maybe more than any guy going in sports today. And the 49ers are going to have their hands full. It's about limiting quick strikes. That's what it's going to have to be. I think the 49ers are the one team that the NFC could send to the Super Bowl to beat this offense. And in the history of Super Bowls, if you just took the team with the best defense, you've done very well. The crazy thing is if you're also taking the team with the most points, that's the 49ers. The 49ers have scored the most points per game and got the best defense remaining in this. So they should match up well. And you just saw the style that they played to get past Minnesota and Green Bay. That's limiting touches to the other team's offense and quarterback, especially guys really scary like Aaron Rodgers. The big joke after the Niners won the NFC title game was it's going to take a lot more than 8 passes for Jimmy Garoppolo to beat Patrick Mahomes. I see what you're talking about, but in another way, I totally disagree because That's exactly the formula I think the Niners are going to have to run, where they possess the ball, they pound it all day, and they just limit the touches. And I think they're going to have to steal a possession somewhere. A special teams play, a fake punt, turnover. That's how I think you're going to have to outscore the rah-rah Kansas City Chiefs.
We're visiting with Damon Bruce, 95.7 The Game in San Francisco. Now, when I look at the running game of San Francisco, you have that nightmare zone blocking thing that the Shanahans have been perpetrating on the NFL, going back to, of course, Mike's incredible run with the Denver Broncos and Mark Schlereth and company. So, but tell me, I mean, you saw what the Chiefs did against the Titans in terms of really what people regard as the best running game in the NFL right now. If the Chiefs can stop that, why can't they stop the 49ers and force Jimmy G to start making plays, which he hasn't had to make so far in the playoffs?
I think it's because styles make fights. And what the Niners have are three different running backs. Well, hopefully three if Tevin Coleman's shoulder makes him able to go for the Super Bowl. But what they have in Raheem Mostert, Matt Breida, and Tevin Coleman are three different kinds of backs who play at three different paces that Shanahan, I think, unleashes perfectly for the matchup. You know, the Tennessee Titans had Derrick Henry, and Derrick Henry. And that's an awful lot of man, but it's just one flavor. The Niners can run different flavors of running game through the inside-outside zone blocking that you're talking about, and it just works. It works in a way that I can't even explain. It works in a way that almost makes you feel warm and fuzzy about old-time football. In a pass-first, gaudy, sexy number league, which Patrick Mahomes is like the captain of,
right.
The Niners do it totally in reverse. They kill you 4.5 yards at a time. It's death by loud paper cuts, let's call it. And they just keep coming. And if they start Coleman and it's not clicking, they go right to Mostert. If that's not clicking, they go right back to Breida. If that's not clicking, they change up the blocking scheme a little bit, and then they just start running it again. It's a wave of fresh legs at you all game long.
To me, one of the probably the top storyline of the next couple of weeks for me personally is George Kittle, because I think this guy could turn out to be the next Gronk over the next 2 weeks, and depending on what happens during the game. I mean, tell us about what you think about George Kittle and kind of elucidate us on his. I mean, people already kind of know to a certain extent, but elucidate us a little bit more on his personality. Do you think that's a possibility? This guy could become a huge, well-known figure the way Gronk is played out with the Pats?
He is a mullet. He is a monster truck rally. He is Sunday. He is everything that you would want a guy who knows how to thump his chest and have a good time on a football field to be. Like, he really does fit all that mold gloriously, and he's got a lot of appeal. It's genuine magnetic personality. The thing that worked with Gronk was you had a great player who really wasn't putting on much of an affectation to his personality. He wasn't trying to please anybody. He was having fun himself. And I think that's what is at the center of George Kittle. The guy is laughing himself at the absurdity of this all the whole way through. He is a hard worker. And if you like tight ends, have I got a Super Bowl for you? I mean,
right. Because you're describing Kelsey to a certain extent.
These two guys, Brooks, they could be a WWE tag team. I mean, they're fantastic personalities.
Could be. I wouldn't be surprised if they are. But, the Niners really haven't had a whole lot of controversy surrounding the team. But there has been developments throughout the season involving Richard Sherman that I'm not necessarily saying are negative. But, what took place in the Packers game and all kudos to Richard Sherman. I think everybody can kind of agree on that, in the way that he bet on himself and the way he's played, and he's done well. But now you get into the Darrelle Revis situation that's been playing out on Twitter, and the distraction that represents, and you get into the matchup with Patrick Mahomes of all people. And do you think the situation with Richard Sherman could end up becoming a negative for the 49ers? Is it a distraction? Could it possibly be a problem? Because that's something that I think is kind of like a wound that could get worse and worse and worse as we get closer to the game.
Absolutely not. I mean, look, Tyreek Hill is is going to be a handful the whole game through. But Richard Sherman's the exact guy you'd want out there trying to figure out a way to slow it down. Let me tell you, Brooks, he's the kind of guy who has a lot of real enemies, a lot of fake enemies, and a lot of imaginary enemies. And when he's all out of his enemies, he'll invent new enemies just to stay frosty and fired up. Remember, this is the same guy who in his mind was snubbed by a Baker Mayfield handshake that never happened. You check the film, and it happened. He makes it up. Whatever it takes for Richard Sherman to stay angry and frosty and motivated, Richard will do that. He is better at keeping a gargantuan chip on his own shoulder, genuine or manufactured himself, better than any athlete I think you're going to find at the Super Bowl. And it's a gift. It's his strength. It's where his power comes from. It's like Samson in the hair. It's like Green Lantern in the ring. Like you can't have Richard Sherman without this everybody is out to get me attitude. So I hope he picks a fight with every existing cornerback in football between now and kickoff.
Visiting with Damon Bruce, 95.7 The Game. And when you look at Kansas City, where I'm from, even though it's a really spread out town, at least it's got this kind of central locus, right? Kind of a coherence to an old school city, if you will, where everybody connects with each other directly. Whereas, like a lot of places these days, the 49ers don't necessarily have that anymore in Santa Clara. So, I mean, what are your thoughts about the team being all the way down there, and just what's an overview of that situation from your perspective, from someone who understands the history of the team, what it has meant to the city of San Francisco, and now that it's really so far away?
I'm talking to you from my home in San Francisco right now. I'll tell you, I made an awful lot of sacrifices to live here with my wife, and we paid through the nose for what we got.
God bless you,
we're proud to be here. She's a native San Franciscan, and staying in this city meant a lot to her. It's unfortunate that the Niners did move so far south, but I'll tell you, looking at what the Raiders are doing, moving to Nevada, and I mean, winning is the ultimate deodorant. I don't care what stinks about your organization. Winning will cure it. Levi Stadium's got its challenges logistically, atmospherically. Checked an awful lot of boxes during the playoffs, though. That place was loud, and there was a lot of that candlestick feel of an older school crowd in there, not giving up your tickets to the opposing team, that sort of thing. Look, the Niners mean more to this city probably than any other franchise. You know, they were here first, and that's what I think moving out of the city, why it hurt so long for so many people. But it's just part of the modern landscape of sports now. And no matter how angry you are at it, you got to get over it. I hear you. Kansas City, I was there in 2012 or 2014 when the Giants and Royals met in the World Series. What great fans, what a great town. Yeah. I love it. But you only get that in smaller Midwestern towns. You know, San Francisco is cosmopolitan. Hell, it's European enough to get over things quickly. You know, I mean, like, it's just the way it is out here. And it's a very transient town. You know, a lot of native San Franciscans left. A lot of people that live here are from somewhere else originally because of all the tech and all the industry and finance that comes through. It's going to be an odd relationship forever. But it's less odd when you're in the Super Bowl. I'll tell you that. I mean, the joke is they're going to have to drive up to San Francisco to have a parade if they want to have a parade, should they win this thing. And hopefully they remember where we are, because it's a hell of a town. You don't want to leave it.
It's a sign of the times. Damon, one more thing before you. Taking all the calls, I mean, you're going to be with your hand on the pulse of that entire, you call it a region, not necessarily a city. So what's going to be the most typical call? What are people going to be calling the most about on your show when it comes to this game?
I think it's just going to be the worry of slowing down Patrick Mahomes. I mean, the biggest entity, the 800-pound gorilla in this Super Bowl is that Chiefs offense. I think it's got to be the focus of everything. I'm certain it's the Niners' focus, slowing that down, making sure that these slow first quarters that have sort of marked the Kansas City entree into the playoffs this year continue to creep into that second, that third, that fourth quarter. How do you slow them down? I think that's job one. That's topic one. You'll have all your, George Kittle in the running game and Kyle Shanahan. And it's been 25 years since they won one. And that was the Steve Young getting the monkey off his back game. Like, all the memories will come out. But this to me is about slowing down Patrick Mahomes. I think the Niners have been the best team in football this year. The Chiefs have been the best team in football over the course of 2 years. And we got a delightful matchup of new school players, a passing of the torch of generation of quarterbacks. We have Andy Reid, the old guard, holding on. Kyle Shanahan, the heir apparent to coaching brilliance, going at it. Like, this should be fantastic, man. We're going to have so much to talk about over the next few weeks. I haven't even done the, oh my God, what do I need to talk about now show yet. We haven't even gotten there yet.
Let me just tell you, America is lucky that we have decided to show up in the Super, because everybody's talking about Brady and the big names aren't. Dude, forget about it. Oh, the ratings are going to. You're lucky that we're going to, because this is the vanguard of the future of the NFL. And man, by the way, that whole thing about you living in San Francisco, that's one of the coolest things I've ever heard. And man, do I wish that the Niners still played at Kezar Stadium, but I guess that's long gone. That's an amazing area. I love San Francisco, man, and I can't thank you enough for taking the time to join us.
Hey, next time you're up here, let me know, man. We're long overdue.
Yeah, absolutely. That's Damon Bruce in San Francisco. The real thing, folks. The real thing. San Francisco, California. As we visit with him, he's on 95.7 The Game. Of course, a guy that when you're driving around town, driving around to the Bay Area, he is the guy that's going to be talking to you. And we're going to talk to someone similar, actually the same type of principle, with Seren Pentro, coming up from 810 WHB here in a minute. Pretty cool, though, because I'm from Kansas City. I'm kind of giving you my own personal thing. You know, as we get closer to the game, I mean, this is one. I mean, I'm not a fantasy league guy, so talking about individual matchups and positions and the non-glamour guys, you know, isn't something that enraptures me. Let's just put it that way normally. But this is one of those games where, and Damon said it, like, styles make fights. And man, do they ever in this game. And, you know, what I said to you earlier, or what I just said to him about America is lucky that they are getting this Super Bowl, you know, very lucky. It could have been the Titans, right? I mean, it could have been the sad sack Packers. And Aaron Rodgers, who in no way resembles what I think was what we're seeing now with Pat Mahomes back in 2010. When I look at Pat Mahomes in the last 7-8 ball games, it's the best stretch of his career, but I think it's the best stretch of any quarterback or any player in the NFL since the Rodgers run of 2010, 2012, where that's why, you know, as a Chiefs fan, when you're trying to figure this game out, because like everybody, I go back and forth. Okay, let's look at what's reliable when it comes to these two teams, and let's add those things up, you know, on both sides of the ball. You know, the reliability of Mahomes, the reliability of the Niners front seven, the reliability of, you know, the Niners offensive line and the zone blocking scheme that they use, the reliability of the Chiefs, all those things. What can we count on? Who has more of those things? And usually that's the team that's going to win. And I think in this particular case, you've got to throw it out, because Patrick Mahomes is someone, and I don't have to tell you this, that you can't scheme for, and it doesn't matter how reliable or how historic your defense is. You can't stop him. It's like the NBA. You cannot stop Patrick Mahomes. And the Titans found that out at the end of the first half on Sunday when he put together, you know, one of the greatest scrambles I've ever seen in my life. Single-handedly snatched that game away from the Titans, deflated the Titans. And that said, of course, and I think this bodes very poorly for the 49ers and can't be exaggerated. The big story of that game, while Patrick Mahomes, of course, gets the headlines is the defense of the Chiefs. And in particular, and we're going to talk to Soren Petro about this and kind of go a little deeper with the Chiefs while we have a chance to talk to somebody who's an expert on the Chiefs. And trust me, this is Soren's bread and butter. We're going to talk to him about how the Chiefs stopped Derrick Henry, because stopping the running game, to me, is the critical part of this game for the Chiefs. If you have a matchup where it's Patrick Mahomes against Jimmy Garoppolo, I'll take that, 10 out of 10 times, 100 out of 100 times, right? That's what you're looking for. So when you look at how the Chiefs stopped Derrick Henry, how did it happen? Did they? Yes, they did. Why? If you look at Henry early in the game, right, the Chiefs were not playing aggressively with their linebackers. That changed in the second quarter, about the midway mark. And once the Chiefs started to essentially rush their linebackers, through the empty spaces, the gaps, along the offensive line where Derrick Henry runs through and runs downhill once he gets through that hole. Once the Chiefs didn't just stand in front of those gaps, but started to pursue inside those gaps, everything stopped. And they kept doing it. And Derrick Henry didn't do much of anything. So that bodes pretty well for the Chiefs, I think, going into the game against the 49ers. Because what have the 49ers relied on? They've relied on their defense, which why wouldn't they? The defense limiting touches, but of course the offense has to participate. And Jimmy G really hasn't yet. So if I'm a Chiefs fan, hey, Jimmy G, go ahead and beat it. Good luck. Go ahead, bud. Go ahead and try. So, I mean, when you look at what the Chiefs have, they have this transcendent player in Pat Mahomes, right? They've got this guy who, no matter what happens, is going to be effective on offense. And what is the calling card of the 49ers? It's defense, the front seven. Now, another part of this that I haven't mentioned yet is the fact that the Titans against Mahomes, the pursuit wasn't there, right? And I don't think the thought process on the Titans defense was there either. Because if you look at, for instance, the play that involved the scramble of Mahomes for the touchdown at the end of the first half, I mean, what are the Titans doing when you've got, the receivers of the Chiefs who stretch the field vertically? Everybody knows that, but you're doubling both those guys on that play, and you're doubling Kelsey, and your defensive line is just indiscriminately rushing the passer. What is that? Right? Now, had the Titans linebackers just made the tackle against Mahomes, that play wouldn't have happened. Didn't work out that way. But after that, I mean, Mahomes had, 40 yards down the field because the Titans just weren't thinking on defense. And against a guy like Mahomes, that's unconscionable. Now, I understand it's pick your poison. You're either going to double the receivers, double Kelsey, or, you'd rather do that maybe than risk Mahomes having single coverage, right? But I would imagine that the Niners are going to see that and be a lot more disciplined on defense, you would think, going into the game. How that's going to work out with, the Chiefs receivers against that secondary, of course, that's the big question. So Soren Petro now is going to join us from Kansas City. We've gone from San Francisco and Damon Bruce now to 810 WHB in my hometown of Kansas City. And Soren Petro is with us. And Soren, first of all, thanks a lot for joining us, man. I really appreciate it.
All right. Always my pleasure, man. Always great to be on with you, brother.
So what's it like, man? What's it like in Kansas City right now?
Man, it's we got a little taste of it with the Royals back in 2014 and 2015. Until then, you had to go back to the Royals championship in '85. But this one is probably, I think the assessment is it's even bigger. It's the NFL, which is a more popular sport than baseball. So there's even more of the town that's fired up about this than we're for the Royals. And it's been 50 years. And there are a lot of us. Look, I'm an old man. Check out the gray hair. Yeah. It didn't happen before I was even born, for crying out loud.
Right. Yeah. So is it like, because, being from Kansas City and having gone back as an adult and worked in the radio business there for a while, and I said this earlier, I would say that in Kansas City, if you're like standing in line at an ATM today, is like a 50-50 chance somebody will just bring it up, right? Yeah. Isn't it it's like a gaga moment in Kansas City because 99% of the people who remember the Super Bowl they're probably not outside, right? I mean, so is this like something that is like a transcendent moment amongst all citizens that kind of connects people, or what is it like?
Yeah, I think it is because it's one of the reasons why they're calling this one of the toughest tickets to get down at the Super Bowl. $5,000 to get in the door right now. And I will see that's its own market that has its own movement.
Wow.
But yeah, Chiefs fans and everybody I know says they're going. Now, listen, I've been to some events where everyone thinks they're going, right? But I think there are going to be a lot of Chiefs fans in bars in Miami because everybody thinks they're going. I don't know how the ticket market works if everybody tries to get it right away and then it kind of regresses and maybe it heats back up before the game. But I know right now, talking to the ticket brokers I know here in town, they're saying, yeah, they can't believe how big the number is already. And it's because there's so many Chiefs fans that think this might be the last time or the only time that they get a chance to see the Chiefs in the Super Bowl.
So forgive me, but from one Kansas City into another, I mean, has the excitement, level hit you at all yet? I mean, do you really believe what's happening, Seren? Because to me it hasn't, and it won't really until they step onto the field.
Yeah,
I just refuse to get excited. I'm so used to not being excited.
Right, and for me, I think part of it might end up being, day of game or maybe week of game. It'll start to feel more real. No, it doesn't. We know what happened, but listen, everybody loves their team, but we've been through so many downs, as you know, Brooks, of blowing a 28-point lead in Indianapolis against Andrew Luck, not forcing Peyton Manning to punt even once in a game with Dick Vermeil's great offense here in Kansas City, the Schottenheimer years of missed field goals and Elway driving down. So much heartache. Was almost relief. There were tears by a lot of the guys, grown men, 48, 49, 50, 52 years old, that were crying because they just couldn't believe it was there. And so I think we're still coming down from the high of getting to the Super Bowl. And that's a legitimate fear, I think, for the team on the field, that they don't kind of mimic what the Chiefs fans are feeling. And that is, it's been so much just to get the Lamar Hunt Trophy was named that in 1984 for Lamar Hunt, who founded the AFL and, of course, founded the Chiefs. And there's been so much conversation about the fact that the Lamar Hunt Trophy has never been in Kansas City, that was a huge accomplishment. Do they now come flat because now they're trying to get back up? They've said all the right things. Travis Kelce said last week, listen, we're not here to get to the Super Bowl. We're here to win the Super Bowl. So they're saying the right things. But you got to wonder with the way this town's been about just getting to the game, let alone winning it.
Visiting with Seren Petro, 810 WHB in Kansas City. And you talked about Lamar Hunt, and I think obviously one of the big stories, if you're paying attention, is Clark Hunt and what his role has been as someone who grew up with Lamar Hunt running the team and then went through the Schottenheimer and Peterson era, and now we have Clark. What has Clark Hunt done to make this happen?
I think he's been a lot like his dad, right? Their biggest strengths as an ownership, as a family and ownership, are also their biggest weaknesses, their loyalty. Right. They stay out of the way when they're losing. People call it out of town absentee ownership because Clark lives down in Dallas. Although, Clark owns just a fifth of the team. He's grandfathered in to the old rules. Where now I think you've got to be liquid 51% and personally own 60%, or maybe I have those numbers backwards. But he and his siblings own the team. There's 5 of them. And Lamar Hunt Jr. lives here in town, is very active locally. He owns the minor league hockey team. He's very philanthropic around the city. So there is a presence from the family that's here all the time. But I think what they are, when they get called absentee owners, it's because they hire what they think are the right people for the job and they let them do it. And when they've got the right people, it works great. When they have the wrong people, it goes really, really wrong. And so, we've ridden the wave up and down with them. The one thing I can say about the Hunt family, and this has been true of the Glass family when they owned the Royals, they've never held the city hostage for things. When they wanted renovations for the stadium, they worked. Some other people hinted at those teams perhaps leaving, but you just look across the state. St. Louis now has a ton of Chiefs fans because they want no part to do with the Rams, with how they left and how they feel like they were lied to by both the Rams and the league, that are now Chiefs fans. And the Chiefs, the organization, the Hunt family, has never held this city hostage and said, hey, we're going to leave. And so I think that's appreciated. And now with the winning, with hiring, getting it right with the head coach and Andy Reid, and then trusting in him, and then he and Brett Veach and John Dorsey at the time getting it right with the quarterback, I think there's a new love affair between the city and the Hunt family. It's a rocky relationship. Nobody's marriage is perfect 365 days a year, and that's been the case certainly here in Kansas City, but it's a very good relationship right now. And I think the city does appreciate how well Clark Hunt has led this organization and putting the pieces together to be back in this game.
I know you're on a tight schedule with availability with Pat Mahomes. Obviously, it's a huge couple of weeks, and I really appreciate your time. But I would be remiss if I didn't ask you one more question that's been in my mind, and it's about Eric Bieniemy.
Okay.
And there's a lot of debate about what exactly is his role with the team. Is he qualified? Why isn't his name out more prominently when you look at his resume? Can you give us a quick overview of what you think of Eric? And is this guy going to be a future head coach in the NFL?
I think he will be. The way it built up around Tony Dungy, like why isn't Tony Dungy getting a head coach?
Right. Good point.
Yeah, he's going to get it. And I think there's some similarities there, right? We'd always like it to be one thing. I think realistically, it's always a number of things. And, one of them is he doesn't call plays. Well, that's a knock that Doug Peterson overcame. That's a knock that Matt Nagy overcame because they held the same position. And both of them have had relative success. Doug Peterson, ultimate success in winning a championship with the Eagles. So that's not it. But it's part of it, right? It's something, when you have Andy Reid over a guy's shoulder, you wonder how much he can do it. Eric Bieniemy's also more of a yeller. As a coach, more of a fiery leader. He's a running back coach. Less of the kind of, the view of him is that he's less of the cerebral guy. So I think that's worked against him. He's not been great in interviews with our medias. He's gotten better. I can tell you last year, I personally don't think he was ready last year when he went through a number of them because he couldn't handle little Kansas City media. And what we had to do, he didn't handle that well. So I think he's gotten better. I'm sure he interviews better this year. Will interview even better next year. He's been much better at handling the questions he gets from us this year. And then I think the part that people don't really want to talk about is, in his playing days and even in his early coaching days, there's some talk of him maybe being a bit of a wild child off the field, that, he liked to go out and have fun, maybe more fun than you'd like your head coach to be. Now, no problems with the law, no legal issues. But that kind of thing has just come up multiple times when I've talked to people about his days in Colorado. And so has he grown past that? Has he lived that down? Is it overblown? Does it get more overblown because he is an African-American coach? I don't know on that, but I think all of those things, if he were white, I don't think we would be questioning as much why he's not getting the job. But because he's African-American and he has the position that two other successful NFL coaches have had, he's the tip of the spear in this argument. And he should be there. And we should be asking these questions. I don't know that we can definitively say one way or the other as to why he's not getting the job right now. But there's more to it just than him being a black football coach.
That's fascinating stuff. Thanks a lot for the intel, man. Outstanding job. I can't thank you enough. And soak it in, babe. Enjoy it. We're going to do our best, buddy. You enjoy it as well. I know you're rooting for it. I know how long you've been a fan and covered the team as well. So let's all enjoy it, man. Let's get one more win. Let's not miss the obvious piece of the equation. Tell me about it. That's Soren Petro, 810 WHB in Kansas City, and he's on a tight schedule, as you can imagine, because he's got to cover the Chiefs as they get closer to the Super Bowl with the San Francisco 49ers. I can't believe I'm actually saying those words. Cam Smith, our producer, San Francisco against Kansas City in the Super Bowl. And Soren, I really appreciate you stopping by. Thanks again so much. Hey, always my pleasure, brother. Anytime, just let me know. So that's Soren Petro of WHB in Kansas City joining us today. And man, that was great to have the guy in San Francisco, the guy in Kansas City. And, as I said before, we're going to have time and we're going to have some NFL guests, as you can imagine, we always do, to break things down with this game. But we'll also have guests on in the next couple of weeks that will give us different angles, different perspectives on the game. Maybe we'll go up to Boston as we sometimes do, and find out how Bill Belichick is doing these days, how he's doing watching Jimmy Garoppolo and the 49ers playing the Super Bowl. Wonder how that's working out. Well, maybe we won't. But I can't help but think about Bill Belichick and what he's going through right now. I mean, of all people, the guy, Bill Belichick, and this is to his credit, the guy who would rather cut bait too early than too late, right? And knowing that he wanted Jimmy G to stick around, knowing that Tom Brady enlisted the assistance of Bob Kraft to make things happen, in which Jimmy G departed the scene, and that Tom Brady now is, public and saying, he wants a gesture from the team, another year in the contract or a more representative salary. And Brady is hanging on. I mean, I think he's a good player, a representative quarterback in the NFL. I don't think he's fallen off a cliff talent-wise, ability-wise, but my God, is Bill Belichick doing a slow burn? And we'll see what happens. But if Garoppolo does emerge, and he might in the Super Bowl, who knows? He really hasn't done much in the playoffs. He hasn't had to do much in the playoffs. I can only imagine the conversation that's gone on, not just, in the head of Bill Belichick, but in the media there. The guys up on 98.5 The Sports Hub and WEEI, what would I do to be a fly on the wall? Well, that's what your internet is for, and your iPhone, to listen to those radio shows, which I'm sure I'll probably hop onto at some point and check it out. But so we got the perspective from Kansas City. We got the perspective from San Francisco. And what's fascinating about this game, and in the last, weekend that we just had, was we had some tremendous games. 7 of the first 8 games were very close in the NFL playoffs. But the last 2 games, championship weekend, they were not competitive, especially the Green Bay San Francisco game, which was basically a boat race. And so the NFL ratings have come out, and it turns out we have the lowest rated championship weekend for the NFL dating to 2009, right? So the NFL ratings have fallen off a cliff when it comes to championship weekend, year over year, down a little. But when you think about last year, we had 2 great games. We had the Rams and we had the Saints in that crazy game. And we had, of course, the Chiefs and the Patriots. That was a hell of a game. So it's understandable that the ratings would be down. All that being said, and, I think it speaks to, the nature of the games, not so much the people who are involved, the teams. It was the fact that the Packers were out of the game so quickly, and that the Titans are this plodding team that slowly but surely were, pushed out of the way by the Chiefs pretty much midway through the third quarter. That game was over when you have a guy like Mahomes and you don't have somebody with the quick strike ability of a quarterback, at least like that on the Titans. I'm not saying Ryan Tannehill has to be like Mahomes, but he wasn't in a position up to that point of having to, improvise and make plays to help his team win. So what's going to take place there? Nothing, as far as the Titans are concerned. So knowing that, I think that's why the ratings are down in the way they are down. So last thing I want to touch on, though, before we check out today, and Cam Smith is our producer today, Cam, and I have this clip that I sent to you. We've got several clips that we'll play over the course of the week. But I think when you look at the storylines, and I brought this up about, and one thing I'm really looking forward to, one of the few things in this 2-week period of promotion up to the Super Bowl, which that's a cliche into itself, complaining about it. I know it is, but is George Kittle and well, having his personality out that much more. I think it's going to be very entertaining. Him and Kelsey and that dynamic. I think the future of Andy Reid with the Chiefs, and I didn't mention that to Seren because I think it's pretty much a given. He'll be back either way, whether they win or not. He's 61 years old, but there's certainly precedent for coaches older than that, like Carroll and Belichick. And you got guys like Mostert. There's a lot of interesting storylines here for the Super Bowl over the next 2 weeks. But to me, one of the more intriguing ones, and it'll be interesting to see what kind of play it is the Shanahans. The fact that Mike Shanahan, of course, this great Super Bowl winning coach, Hall of Fame caliber coach, running the same kind of offense as his son, Kyle, and, their relationship. And so I thought we would play a clip from Mike, his father, Kyle's father, that has a Super Bowl angle to it that I thought you might find interesting. So if you could play that clip of Mike Shanahan, Cam, as we kind of wind things down today on Sports by Brooks on Fancred. Here we go.
I told my wife, I said, hey, I know why this guy is so successful. I know why this guy is the best in the business. People just don't do that. That's what type of guy Donald Trump is. Very, very special. Okay, just a couple more stories. Mike. For the next 10 years, I get to know him. We talk on the phone. He does 5 or 6 things for me that is just beyond.
I don't want to know what those are.
I mean, he went out of his way. So in return, the only thing I thought I could do is, hey, I want to give him a couple good Super Bowl tickets. Unfortunately, we weren't there in the Super Bowl. All I could do was give him the tickets. That's another story in itself. What I did after I sent him the tickets, he sent them back to me. He says, hey, thanks for doing that, but I don't expect anything in return. That doesn't happen very often, but that's what told me he was a very, very special guy.
Talking about the president. So Mike Shanahan telling a story, and Mike Shanahan, that's in Colorado during the presidential election campaign. Mike Shanahan, the father of Kyle Shanahan, stumping for Donald Trump, talking about Trump and telling stories about his interactions. And but interesting, though, when you look at what happened in San Francisco when Colin Kaepernick was with the team, and a month after Kyle Shanahan was hired as the head coach of the team, suddenly Colin Kaepernick was gone. And that was not necessarily a foregone conclusion. There may be more to the story there, with the attitude when it comes to Colin Kaepernick, or, whatever. You see where I'm going. I'm not necessarily saying that this is a big deal or a big story, but of course I just brought it up. So maybe it might be, but there's a lot more clips out there of Mike Shanahan extolling the virtues of Donald Trump. That's fine. But I do think that one thing that really is legitimate when you bring up, and I mentioned it to Damon Bruce in San Francisco today, and I'm going to repeat it one more time because it really bears repeating. If you have followed the NFL and you followed Mike Shanahan's run with the Broncos, right? Think Mark Schlereth, offensive lineman, right? Think Terrell Davis. Those names may be a distant memory to you, but somehow, some way, they were able to consistently run the ball over a long period of time with the Broncos, and seemingly with interchangeable backs, dominating the NFL, winning Super Bowls doing it, right? And that's what Mike Shanahan's offense did. And I know it's a new day, right? It was a long time ago. But when you think about the 49ers right now and look at Raheem Mostert stepping in, which, I mean, for him to perform that way, that is, you talk about a non sequitur, a binary event, unless you remember that happening with the Broncos when Mike was coaching. and when you would see the Broncos plug guys in. And I'm not saying that's an uncommon situation in the NFL. James Conner and Le'Veon Bell. I mean, there's a lot of examples where guys will step in. Running back is not necessarily, the most difficult position to come in and make a huge impact instantly. But when you look at Mostert's, past his resume, and that doesn't mean he's not a good running back potentially, but he was cut 6 times. And we're not talking about somebody with overwhelming size. He's got great speed. But so I think when you are evaluating the 49ers, especially the 49ers offense, and you're trying to work out in your mind, okay, I just watched the Chiefs shut down Derrick Henry, right? I just watched the Chiefs punch the Titans in the mouth, which they literally did. Ask Ryan Tannehill, right? Ask A.J. Brown. When you think about that, that's the matchup I think that really matters here is, can the 49ers run the ball against the Chiefs defense that just stopped Derrick Henry? That's what I'm looking at when I'm evaluating which team I would bet. When you're evaluating the over-under, the amount of points are going to be scored, because look, I just can't imagine at this point Jimmy G is going to be called upon to step up, right, in a situation that is conducive to the 49ers winning. Because if Jimmy G is in a position where he has to throw a lot, what do you think's happening in the game? It's probably not good for the 49ers. Now, some people say, well, Kyle Shanahan's a genius, and he's just taking what the defense is giving. Well, apparently that doesn't involve Jimmy G so far, and it's hard for me to imagine that could reverse itself 180 degrees, and now Jimmy G is the guy who's instrumental in leading the offense, right, rather than the running game from the outset. I just can't see it happening. So that, to me, more than anything, of course, I'll do a 180 in about 3 days when somebody comes on and explains why that's wrong. That usually is what happens, because we have so many NFL experts on this show, and you can bet over the next couple of weeks we're going to do that. We were all NFL today, all Super Bowl. And today was kind of a scene set, if you will, taking you up to San Francisco and over, this is from LA where we are, over to Kansas City and getting a scene set and kind of we really got a lot of flavor of San Francisco, the whole scenario there with Damon Bruce. And then, of course, Soren Petro and his assessment of Eric Bieniemy was really fascinating and complicated. And man, I mean, it's hard to process all the things that he said, trying to figure out, because I have no doubt, I mean, that of people in the media that have to speak, on the airwaves publicly, he is as knowledgeable probably as anybody out there. And I think he's very thoughtful in his observations. I mean, that's what he does. He's on the air 3-4 hours a day talking about that stuff. And when you look at somebody like Bieniemy and you say to yourself, how the hell is his name not out there more? When you look at his resume, and it's similar to so many of the other guys theoretically, and you look at him with a play sheet during games and all that stuff. So I'm glad we got that perspective, and we're going to wrap things up today for now. One last thing. I want to mention this from Tucker Boynton on Twitter. As we were talking about Jimmy Garoppolo, Garoppolo has the second highest passer rating versus the Chiefs of any player to attempt at least 35 passes against Kansas City since 1970. Jimmy G is second in passer rating against the Chiefs amongst players, quarterbacks with at least 35 passes against the Chiefs since 1970. Number 3 on the list is Aaron Rodgers. But I think when you look at that statistic from Tucker Boynton on Twitter, thanks to Cam Smith for that as well, our producer, as everybody knows, especially in the NFL, when you look at when those things play out compared to what's going on right now, just look at the difference between the Chiefs defense last year and this year. It's like 180 degrees. It was like watching the Chiefs play last year. It was like watching an NBA game. Couldn't stop anybody. It was just the last team to possess the ball when you were watching the Patriots, when you were watching the Rams, but you were watching the whole season. A little bit like Oklahoma, the NFL, right? And so that's why I'm so focused on the offense of San Francisco. And I'm so focused on, and I'm glad you brought that stat up about Jimmy G, because I'm the first person to say I think he has a chance, to make a splash in this Super Bowl. But I think we're now to the point where he is encountered disuse to the extent that it really is hard to believe that, and this is not someone who is a lockdown certainty when he opens up the offense and starts throwing the ball all over the field. By no means is he someone that you can just count on. So and you look at the importance of this game and the stage and everything that it represents. So I haven't really settled on exactly where I'm going with this game. But if I was to pick it today, if I was to give some guidance on it today, I would lay the points and go, in the direction of the Chiefs right now, and or just go in the direction of the Chiefs, whatever that entails, whether it's taking the points, laying the points. And I would also lean to right now the under, because of specifically the Chiefs' performance on defense against the Titans. But that may be something that I reevaluate as we go along, because of the nature of the way the Chiefs changed the way they were playing defense. Again, around the second quarter of that game is when they changed the approach of Frank Clark and the linebackers. Once they did that, once they really not just filled the gaps, but were aggressively rushing through those gaps to try to meet Derrick Henry as quickly as possible, downhill, if you will. That's what changed everything. But that might not work against the 49ers. And Derrick Henry certainly is a different back than, at the very least, somebody like Mostert. Couldn't be more different. So it's going to be a hell of a cerebral matchup when you look at each team. And at least from the perspective of the 49ers offense and the Chiefs defense, where I think the game is going to be won or lost. Pat Mahomes is something that's reliable, and I think we're going to see points from him no matter what. The question is going to be, what can the Niners do offensively against this Chiefs defense? That's really where I want to go as we move towards this game. So, so for now, that's going to wind down the conversation about the Super Bowl, and we're going to have more for you coming up here on Fancred every day, as we always do. We've got more guests coming up later on in the week. We've got some surprises. We're not going to do all NFL. If something pops up, big current event, you can bet that we're going to be covering it, and we're going to be out front, and we're going to be giving you different perspectives that you can't get anywhere else, right? So for our producer, Cam Smith, this is Brooks Melchior. I'm live in Los Angeles, and we'll see you back here tomorrow at noon Eastern time on Sports by Brooks on Fancred.